This is a story my great-grandfather experienced. It was the Taisho era. It was a long time ago. Let's call my great-grandfather Masao. Masao's hobby was hunting. Whenever he had free time, he often went hunting in the mountains and caught wild boars, hares, pheasants, and so on. He was also a very skilled hunter, and was a bit of a celebrity among his hunting companions. Mountains are places where strange things happen, aren't they? My grandfather also heard many strange stories from Masao. Today, I would like to tell you the scariest of them all. It was a clear and sunny May day. Masao was carrying his hunting rifle and climbing his usual mountain. He was accompanied by his dog, Takeru. He is an Akita dog, by the way. Masao had a long experience of hunting in the mountains, and he often went hunting alone. There was a hut he built by himself in the mountain, and he enjoyed cooking his catch and drinking sake there most of all. That day we started hunting early in the morning, but we did not catch any prey at all. It was already evening, and it was getting dark in the mountains. Masao thought, let's try for another hour or so, and decided to continue hunting. About 30 minutes later, Masao gave up almost all of today's catch. Just as Masao was about to give up on today's catch, a magnificent boar suddenly appeared in front of him. It was with cubs. Masao set his sights on it and tried to fire a shot. The boar, startled by the sudden appearance of a human, suddenly reversed and ran up the mountain path. Masao fired one shot, but it missed. His dog, Takeru, was the first to chase after the boar. Masao followed him and ran up the steep mountain path. It must have been about 15 minutes of chasing. At last, Masao lost sight of the boar and his son. He had lost Takeru and was at a loss when he heard Takeru's barking in the distance. Relying on the barking, Masao sprinted along the mountain path. After another 10 minutes of driving, Takeru was there. He was barking furiously into the deep bushes. It looked like an entrance to some kind of place, with huge pine trees towering on either side. Masao knew it well. It was an unspoken taboo, a must-not-enter place for his hunting companions and all the people living in the surrounding area. Masao's parents had told him many times since he was a child. There is a god of the mountain there. If you go in there carelessly, you will be eaten. However, for some reason, if one went further into the forbidden area, one could catch fish in an interesting way. However, it is said that there has been no end to the number of hunters who have broken the law and gone missing since the old days, but Takeru is barking boldly toward that bush. There is no doubt that that boar and his son are nearby. Masao succumbed to temptation and stepped into the forbidden land. The time is past 5 p.m., and although I can still manage to see my surroundings with the naked eye, it is already dangerously light for hunting. Takeru has also stopped barking since a while ago. Just when Masao is about to give up, Takeru starts barking furiously again and runs off. Masao followed him and ran about 50 meters. Takeru was in a threatening posture, sitting down with a growl. Masao thought he had finally found him, and looked ahead. A black shadow was crouched there, and he could hear the sound of something being chewed. A terrible smell of animal smell was wafting around the area. Masao swallowed his spit, got down on one knee on the ground, and held up his hunting rifle. It was not a wild boar. Masao decided so. It was too thin to be a wild boar, and it didn't have much hair on its body. A wolf? I thought so for a moment. But I had never heard of or seen a wolf in these mountains. I looked closer and saw that it was eating a baby boar lying on the ground. Masao felt as if his prey had been intercepted. He aimed his hunting rifle at it and tried to shoot, but his finger on the trigger would not move. In fact, his body was as if it was in a bind. Only his back teeth were clattering in fear. Then, perhaps noticing Masao's presence, it stopped eating and slowly turned its face toward Masao. No matter how he looked at it, it was a human face. And of a baby, about 2 to 3 years old. It was about 1 m 50 cm long, with a body like a panther and thin body hair. To put it simply, it had the appearance of a baby with the body of a panther and the face of a human being. A monster. Masao's fear reached its peak. It approached Masao, licking its tongue around the boar's blood-soaked mouth. "I'm going to be killed." Just when Masao thought that, Takeru jumped on it. Takeru bites the right paw of it and shakes his head violently. It made a cry that sounded just like a human baby and scratched the tip of Takeru's nose with its left paw. Masao was stunned for a while, but when he came to himself, he realized that his body could move freely. He immediately fired a shot. It didn't work. That's impossible. Masao has been taking care of his hunting rifle without fail, and today he just did a final check before going out hunting again. He pulled the trigger one more time. It didn't fire. While Masao was taking his time, it bit Takeru on the neck. Takeru lets out a shrill cry. Masao, in a fit of desperation, swung the large mountain sword at his waist, and it turned its back on him. He slashed at the back of it, which was turning its back to him. Ito mewled like a cat in heat, but it remained in the same position, biting Takeru's neck. Masao swung his machete once more and severed Ito's tail, the it with its tail severed. It let out a strange cry and disappeared into the bushes deep in the forest. Masao stood there stunned for a while. He came to himself when he heard Takeru's labored ha 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 ha. Takeru had a bite mark on his neck that resembled the shape of a human tooth. He was bleeding, but the wound was not deep. Masao applied antiseptic and a cloth to his neck and gave him first aid. Somehow, he seemed to be able to walk on his own. But if he was too lazy, the monster might attack him again. Masao and Takeru hurried down the mountain path. Soon, Masao's hut came into view. From here, Masao's village was less than 30 minutes away. Relieved, Masao hurried to the village even faster. It was about 15 minutes after descending from the lodge that Masao thought something was wrong. He felt as if he was going round and round on the same road. This was a mountain that Masao had been playing around since he was a child, so it was impossible for him to get lost. Feeling an inexpressible sense of uneasiness, Masao accelerated his steps even further. After another 15 minutes. How can this be? The hut he had seen earlier was right in front of him. Masao was confused, but he was so upset by what had happened that he thought he must have taken a wrong turn. He went down the same path once more. But soon Masao was struck with a sense of hopelessness. He inevitably returned to the lodge. Takeru was also breathing heavily, and blood was seeping from the cloth around his neck. Masao was reluctant, but decided to stay at the lodge for the night. When Masao entered the lodge, it was already past 8 p.m. Suddenly a sense of relief, exhaustion, and hunger overcame Masao, and he lay down on the floor in a heap. Then he thought about the monster he had just encountered. After all, that must have been the mountain god. Thinking of this, his body began to shake uncontrollably, and Masao began to drink the shochu he had stored in the mountain hut as a distraction. There was also some smoked wild boar for preservation, but it did not go down well. When I shared it with Takeru, he was happy to eat it. I can't sleep today. Masao put his hunting rifle aside and decided to stay awake. Scratching, scratching. Masao was awakened by the sound of something being scratched. He was tired and had been drinking, so he fell asleep before he knew it. When he looked at the clock, it was past 1 a.m. Scratching, scratching. The sound comes from the roof of the cabin. Takeru seems to have woken up, too, and lets out a low growl. Masao unconsciously picked up his hunting rifle. No way, that guy must be here. Masao thought so, but he did not dare to go outside the hut to check. He just gripped his gun and stared at the ceiling of the cabin. For the next 10 minutes or so, the sound of clawing could be heard on the ceiling, but eventually it stopped. For Masao, it was like a nightmare that lasted forever. Even after the sound stopped, Masao was still staring at the ceiling. Soon, he heard a sound that sounded like a human murmuring, blah blah blah. Popo. Popo. Masao listened attentively, trembling with fear, and suddenly Takeru began to bark with great intensity. Then he heard a sound like something running on the roof of the cabin and something heavy falling to the ground. Takeru now continued barking toward the entrance of the cabin. Screech, screech, screech. Something that was on the roof earlier seems to be scratching at the door of the cabin. Takeru curls his tail, backs up, and continues to bark boldly. Who is it? Masao shouted. He held his hunting rifle up to the door. Then the scratching sound stopped. This time, from just beyond the door, he heard a voice that sounded like a human child.
Tails, Tails.
That's him. Masao shivered with fear. He clenched his clattering back teeth. What do you want? He shouted. Takeru was still barking.
Tail, Tail, give me back my tail.
Takeru was still barking. Tail, Tail, give me my tail back. Masao couldn't stand it and fired a shotgun toward the door. A strange cry of Kyo came from behind the door, and Masao fired 2 or 3 shots in rapid succession. Through the hole in the door made by the shotgun, Masao could see the red, bloodshot eyes.
Tail, Tail, give me back my tail.
It said a voice that sounded just like a human toddler's. I don't know anything about a tail. I don't care about your tail. Go home. Masao tried to pull the trigger again, but his body would not move.
Tail, Tail, give me back my tail.
It kept repeating that, like a broken tape recorder. I don't know. Get away from me.
Tail, Tail, give me back my tail.
It scratches at the door again, looking at Masao with angry red eyes through the hole in the door, and repeats the words. Takeru also stops barking, curls his tail and shrinks back. I don't know your tail. I don't know your tail. Get away from me, Masao exclaimed, his body still frozen. Then it screamed.
No, you cut it off.
And came in through the door. Masao's memory was then interrupted. The face of the toddler that appeared through the door. The bloodshot eyes that bared their anger. The sharp paw claws. The searing pain in his own face. Takeru leaps at it. The selfless shotgun fire. Masao found himself on a bed in the village hospital, where he had been in a coma for 3 days. Masao's injuries included a laceration on his left cheek as if he had been torn by a beast, a broken bone in his right leg, and abrasions all over his body. His injuries were quite serious. Masao only told the villagers that he had been attacked by a bear. However, they seemed to somehow sense what had happened to Masao, and gradually he was treated like a member of the village. Eventually Masao moved to Tokyo, where he married and my grandfather was born. Incidentally, Masao told this story to my grandfather 3 days before he died of lung cancer. I'll just say that it happened in the mountains deep in the forest in Wakayama Prefecture. By the way, his dog, Takeru, had died, covered over Masao as if he was protecting him. The meat and bones were in almost perfect condition, but for some reason, only the internal organs were missing, and not a single one of them was clean. This concludes this story. Thank you for listening to the end.